Welcome to Bad Dog Agility, a podcast helping you reach all of your dog agility goals. Whether it's competing under the bright lights of the televised finals at Westminster or successfully navigating a homemade course in your own backyard, we'll bring you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
The show starts with your hosts, Jennifer, Esteban, and Sarah.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 356. Today's podcast is brought to you by hititboard.com and the new Teeter Teach It, an easy-to-use tool that controls the amount of tip on your teeters so you can introduce motion to your dog in a gradual way. Go to hititboard.com for the new Teeter Teach It and other training tools and toys. Use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Today's podcast comes from a question that one of our VIP members asked us, and we decided it would be a good kind of discussion to have on the podcast for a more general audience. The specific question was, is it possible, or maybe is it advisable, to do both AKC titling and AKC ISC, so the International Sweepstakes class, which is more like an FCI agility style of course? Is it possible to do both of those, or to do well at both of those, or to succeed at both of those? And so we wanted to talk about that and talk a little bit more broadly kind of about, different organizations and just the kind of considerations that you should think about when you're planning which organizations, which titling programs, which big events you would like to go to. So Jen, this email actually came in specifically for you. So we're just going to kick things off and let you kind of start with your answer to AKC titling versus AKC ISC.
I think this is a great topic, and hopefully there'll be a lot of great takeaways, because it used to be agility as a sport was pretty consistent from organization to organization. And I know, for many years, I would just choose what was closest to home. I've done everything from NADAC to AKC to USDA to CPE, doing some UKI more recently. And over the years and evolution of the sport, we've seen a greater and greater divide in the different organizations. So it wasn't just like, oh, okay, who am I paying my money to and who is tracking my titles? But now enough of a divide that we're thinking about what skills are we teaching our dogs? What things do I need for this organization versus that organization? And the question kind of specifically came from the standpoint of, if I do AKC titling, is that helping or hurting my potential to do ISC, or vice versa? If I do a lot of ISC, is that going to help or hurt my AKC? And this is something that I have perspective on from a lot of different angles, both with my dogs. So all of my dogs both doing ISC and AKC. And I think the most well-known of my dogs is B. She's been on the AKC World Team the last 2 years, while also attending the AKC Agility Invitational the last 2 years, which I picked those two events because for AKC titling, for the Invitational, you're doing AKC titling and you have to do a fair amount of it. So she's doing a fair amount and she's being relatively successful. We just finished 2024 as the number one Sheltie in AKC. But she's also making her spots onto the AKC World Team, which is predominantly FCI. So I have the perspective of the competitor, but also I have really found the challenge to balance all organizations difficult from the instructor side. And that's one of the things that we can talk about on a more broad sense of factors to keep in mind. Are you training at a facility whose challenges and lesson plans match what you're competing in? Are you practicing the right skills? And so what was happening for me is I was getting more and more of a divide. And it used to be, if somebody wanted to do, I'm just going to kind of air quote here, the hard stuff, right? The internationals, what we used to call it. Now we have more specific terms. You'd just take the cone and you'd go from the front side to the back side. So one person would come in for their lesson and they'd work sequences or a course, and the next person could come in and I could just move that number 9 cone and say, well, you're going to do it as a backside. And that's just not the case anymore. So recently I have found with the evolution of the courses to actually need to restructure the entire way that I do my lesson plans so that I have AKC titling lesson plans and I have ISC lesson plans. So that's kind of the long answer of things that and factors that went into this. But in my opinion, and the tricky part here is defining what success is. In my opinion, it is incredibly difficult to do both well. I'm not going to say successful because I think a lot of people would say that I am doing it successfully. Well, you're doing it, Jen. You're doing it both with B and you're doing it well. In my opinion, I'm not. I am not doing it well. I'm not going to Europe and running clean. I am not going to Europe and coming home with medals. And the reason that I'm not even the most comfortable on the team with the skills is because of the AKC that I am doing. So I'm very aware that the amount of AKC that I do is a direct conflict and is negatively impacting my FCI skills or my ISC skills, and vice versa. If I were to give up everything in the United States and all titling AKC and just focus on ISC, I do believe B could be significantly better at it, but that's not something I'm willing to give up at this time. So in my opinion, the reason that B is not more successful in ISC is because of the AKC. And there's a lot of dogs that are doing better than her because they've made a choice to give up all AKC titling. I'm not going to name names. There's plenty of people doing it now that ISC is so readily available. Dogs that have fantastic international skills and have never stepped foot in an AKC titling ring. So in my opinion, it is very difficult to do both well. There are way too many skills that are in direct conflict of one another.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I kind of want to play a little bit of devil's advocate because I think that the number of people that truly have the capability, the time, the expertise and the skill to go be the best in the world is very, very small. And I think that the number of people listening to this that would be over the moon excited to be as good as Jennifer Crank in both AKC agility and FCI agility is like 99.9999% of the listeners. So I think that's where it also has to come down to goals. Like if your goal is to be the best in the world, then you have to define what best in the world means. And then you have to really optimize around that. But I do think just even listening to how you described it, that you can enjoy the sport.
Yes.
Doing both AKC agility and ISC, or doing AKC and UKI, or doing UKI and, international. I think you can enjoy the sport. And so it kind of comes down to what are your goals? There's your goal to enjoy your time with your dog and also challenge yourself and also kind of show off your skills. Or is your goal to be, the best in the world at the FCI Agility World Championships specifically?
I mean, I don't disagree. And that's why I said it kind of depends on definition of success. Right. And that's hard because I do not consider myself successful at FCI. But as you said, there'd be literally hundreds of people that would say what I'm doing is success in their mind. So yeah, absolutely. It comes down to goals and it comes down to what you want to do with them. Do you just want to do them? Sure. Do you want to do them well? I do think there's a lot of conflict. So yes, I totally get that my standards and my expectation and my goals may not align directly with a lot of others out there for sure.
Yeah. At first I was going to disagree. And then you went and explained everything. And I thought, oh yeah, she is not wrong at all. And I remember even as far back as 5, 6, 7 years ago, it's on my mind 5, 6, 7 years ago, because 2016, I think that was the last time that Westminster broadcast their finals live, and they're doing it again this year, right? After being pre-recorded for years and years and years and years. And I was there, and I was running Golden Gitchie, who's also going to tryouts for, I think, the Agility World Championship, so the FCI Championship. And we would do things like try and get all your qualifying runs, which you had to do mostly in regular coursework. And then as soon as we got them, I would essentially stop and only do international coursework. And then all our practice training was international courses, mostly designed by the judges who were going to be at tryouts for the World Championship that year. And And I think that's what you had to do to get better on those courses, right? So I think if we're talking about you have two venues, venue A and venue B, it doesn't matter what the two venues are. If they are significantly different, maybe even not that significantly different, but if it's significantly different to win or medal or accomplish something, make the finals in one event as opposed to the other, if it requires if there are true differences there, then yes, your preparation needs to be different. So there is going to be sacrifice, because I think in agility, we've reached a point where competition is so competitive. It's so tough, so difficult and again, I'm not talking about just showing up and being happy that you're there. I'm talking about going out and trying to be on the podium. That choices have to be made because you have limited time. And even if you have unlimited time, I know that a lot of people who say work and do agility more on the side or as a hobby and are not professional dog trainers or instructors are often jealous of, professional competitors and trainers and instructors. But even as an instructor, if you have infinite time, the issue that I would run into with my dog is she needs a break, right? And so this is one of the disadvantages, of course, of working with a non-border collie, right? The ability to work is a little bit less, or in some cases, a lot less. So you have a finite amount of time and energy, resources, money, days off from work, things like that, right? And you have to spread that around. And obviously, the more organizations you have, especially if you start throwing in a C or a D, right? And I think considering, even though AKC is doing ISC, the two style of courses are so different. So even though you can, let's say you only did AKC, it's still so different. You can basically consider it two different organizations, right?
Right.
A and B, because over the past 8 years, I feel like there's been a plateau in AKC regular coursework, right? And maybe it's the existence of the premier classes, ISC classes, the different venues and televised events, Premier Cup, things like that. The courses are different in different championship events. What you see at AKC Nationals is different from the Invitational, which is different from tryouts and Westminster. They each have their own little bit of flavor that requires a little bit of prep. And of course, the best dogs generally can more easily go from one to the other, generally speaking, right? But yeah, I think you essentially have to kind of pick and choose if you're trying to get to the very top. And I think you can get really close still, right? If
Yeah,
you
I
have
agree.
the time and the resources. But this is such a personal question, right? So it's one of those questions that it sounded like there's a really easy answer to give, right? And then I was like, no, I have 10 follow-up questions for the person who asks it, right? Tell me about your dog. Tell me about you. Tell me about your goals. Do you work? What kind of time do you have? What access to equipment do you have? Can you set up entire courses? Can you set up a new course every week or two? What kind of shape are you in? What kind of shape is your dog in? Do you travel well? Can you fly your dog cargo? I mean, there's just a lot of stuff, right? So I think it's a more complicated question.
Yeah. I think another thing, I hesitate for people to feel like they need to lock in a particular organization or style, and otherwise they're going to break their dog. And so I don't want people to take this and be like, I have to decide which organization I want my puppy to do. And, I'm going to stick with that one and I'm not going to do any others. And especially if you, the handler, have not had a ton of experience in the sport, to kind of go and learn yourself and figure out your own strengths and weaknesses and figure out what you want out of the sport. So I would kind of advocate for people who are less experienced, people with first or second dogs. I would be like, don't worry about it. Do what you want to do. Go out, try all the things, figure out what style of course fits, you enjoy the most, fits your dog's strengths the most, figure out where your strengths and weaknesses are, figure out if you care enough about your, whatever skill that you're missing to succeed at a different venue. Do you care enough about that venue to put in the time to do that skill? Like, I think all of that takes some exploration. And what I don't want to see is people kind of not doing that exploration and feeling very locked in and really siloing themselves and siloing the community. And I don't think it's necessary. So I kind of view this honing in on a particular organization or style of course as a little bit more of kind of like the problem of the experts, the problem of the people, like Jen, who have accomplished, basically have gone all the way in every organization, right? Like, titles and national championships in multiple organizations, winning Westminster, medaling at Worlds. And they're trying to, when you get that good, there's few places where you can improve. Right. And so one of the places where you could possibly improve is if you really focus on one style of course to the point where, we all know that our dogs kind of can get a sense for a style of course or a flow of course. They start to predict where the obstacles are and things like that. And so you kind of tap into that advantage of really throwing the same thing at them over and over again. But if you are, if your contacts are 50%, like if you're getting a contact call 50% of the time, if your dog is breaking their start line at, before you start the course, like you have other problems that you need to address, and picking your one and only venue is like not where you need to be focused right now. You need to focus your training time on getting your contacts, up to stuff and your weaves and your start lines, knowing that no matter where you go, you're going to need all those things, right? So I just feel like it's a question that can paralyze some people, and I want to kind of remove a little bit of that from it. But while also recognizing, like Jen said, that there are significant differences now. And I think that it also depends, like you said, it depends on your goals. It depends on your speed relative to your dog's speed. And I think that some of the courses do kind of favor one, I guess, type of dog over another. So in my head, I'm specifically thinking of like large strided dogs, like the larger fast border collies, even the smaller fast border collies, but basically your 20 or 24 inch dogs, but especially those 24 inch dogs. I think some of these organizations with the big spacing, like that could really be a very different kind of running for a large strided dog compared to like your medium dog. And I think that's where things could get different.
I know for me personally, there's been a lot of discussions about BMI performance over the past couple years. I've heard several people who are advocates of doing both say, well, Jen can do it and B can do it. And I've heard people who are then countering the other side saying, well, yeah, that's a Sheltie. That's a 16-inch jumping Sheltie. And I absolutely own that. Like, I get that it is easier for her to bounce back and forth on things because of her size. I also think that she has an exceptional brain. The way that she thinks, the way that she understands that things that she can do, she's a bit of an anomaly in that. So I do think there's a size factor there. I think, yes, if you went out and you committed to nothing but 6 months of ISC and then came back to an AKC with a 20 or 24 inch jumping Weimaraner, Doberman, Border Collie, whatever, they're going to struggle. I mean, there's no doubt that they're going to struggle. And then the reverse is true. You know, we kind of do in the US Open wrap up, or when not us as Bad Dog, but when people talk about it, about how big those courses are for the little dogs, and they're not used to it, and twice as much yardage on those US Open courses as what they're used to on an AKC master titling. So it's going to go both ways, and little dogs, big dogs, and organization to organizations. I think your points are absolutely spot on, that it's a little bit of it's going to depend on the team. There's going to be some teams that go back and forth, and it could be the handler, it could be the dog. Maybe your timing is better when you have more distance between obstacles to communicate to the dog. And there's going to be some dogs that are better when the course is tighter and the course is smaller, because maybe the handler mobility isn't there. So they can run a 90 by 90 AKC course that has a lot of pinwheels and wraps easier than they can run a UKI speed stakes course that's going to be on a 120 by 100. So the idea of taking in all those factors, I think, is absolutely relevant.
I think it's also something I would love for everybody who's listening to this to go back and listen to our podcast called Choose Your Own Agility Adventure. It's one of my personal favorites that we've ever done. And the basic 2-second version of it is that it is okay to not do everything. And not only is it okay, it is necessary. Like nobody can do everything. Given the state of agility today, the number of different organizations, the number of big events, the number of international events is just too much for anybody to do everything. And so rather than feeling bad about that, it actually makes a lot of sense to pick and choose where you want to spend your time, what you enjoy the most, and what you're going to be the most successful at. So I came at it, 5 minutes ago, I came at it saying I don't want people to, feel like they can't explore and stuff like that. But I'm also telling you, it is okay to not do everything and to not feel bad about it and to just pick the organizations that you enjoy the most and spend your time there.
I have one add-on to that, and that's, I thought there was a time, I don't know how many years ago, where FCI international courses, because they were more difficult, because Americans especially, I'm looking at this from a very American perspective, Americans tended to go overbroad and not do very well, right? So there's an impression that, or a thought that those courses are tougher. Therefore, if you did that or you were successful there, that you were essentially better, objectively better at agility. And I really no longer feel that way. There's so many different courses, and the dog that's going to do well at WAO, World Agility Open, in say pentathlon versus the games versus FCI World Champs, even the differences between, and there's a lot of overlap, but types of dogs from FCI Agility World Championship to European Open, just because the structure of how you get to the final and who wins is a little bit different, right? Just it's a standard only winner take all at the European Open. But you've got to do standard and jumpers and essentially be clean in both at the Agility World Championship, right? So it's going to select for slightly different dogs, even though there's going to be some overlap, right? But you don't often get champions of both, a dog who has won both. It's very, very rare. So I guess I'm saying that I no longer feel like that. And honestly, in this day and age, I think people don't really care. Maybe there was a time when the fancy cared, and I just feel like people really don't care. So go and do the courses that you're interested in doing. And a lot of it, honestly, is probably going to be determined not by you, right? If your instructor leans one way and tends to set up these kind of courses because that's where they compete. If you're in the middle of nowhere and they don't, your classes aren't really geared toward international courses, right? You're probably going to have less opportunity to do that. If you end up mostly trialing all the shows near you are NADAC or CPE versus AKC or UKI, right? So breed differences, right? Age, health of your dog. A lot of stuff is not going to be determined by you. When I sit down and I really think about it, but you're going to take all these factors into consideration. And it goes back to the point that you made, Sarah, the choose your own adventure. And do this because you want to do it, right? You're excited about international coursework. Go and learn everything you can about that, right? Go and study those courses and course designs and go to those seminars and pick up those handling skills. And if you're really interested, like I was way back in 2008, in going to the AKC Invitational, right? Then you better get good at running clean and putting together the 4 clean runs that you need to get into the final. But there are so many different options out there. And I think Jen makes a very fair point that we're at the point where in agility, you can't do it all anymore, right? And if you want true optimization, yes, of course, obviously, you're going to have to pick and choose. On the other hand, I would still say you can do both at a very, very high level. Some of our highest placing recent finishers, and I guess I'm thinking about not just B, but some of the border collies like Jessica Zhu and Perry DeWitt out there have come and won, right? Westminster, right? AKC Nationals, our big national events here, but also done very, very well internationally. So it can be done. Of course, I'm identifying some of the top handlers who have ever played the game to come out of this country, right? And it's it's a list of probably less than 10 people, right? But there's a whole group of hundreds of people right behind those 10 people that can do both at a very, very high level. So again, goes back to your goals and what you want to do. So as we wrap up here, the three of us are just going to run the list for you. And we're going to come at it as if you, the listener, are just getting started in agility. You have a great dog. You're doing a lot of stuff and very impressed people in your class, your instructor at your first couple of trials. They're like, hey, you guys are doing so great. You should consider doing ISC, international coursework. You like to run around. You look very fit or active and all those other fantastic stereotypes people have of people who run international coursework. First of all, if you don't fit those stereotypes, international coursework is still absolutely for you. There are people out there who are crushing at all levels. Don't limit yourself. But let's get to it. What are all the differences besides, training is going to have to be different? And we didn't really talk about how it's going to be different. I think a lot of these differences stem from rules and differences in equipment specifications and course design. So let's start talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, one obvious one is going to be jump height. So different organizations have different cutoffs, which means depending on your dog, you might have to jump different jump height in one versus the other. So you definitely want to look at that, and that's going to be a factor in what's best for you and your dog. I think another one is part of this, I think, is course design kind of trends, but I think there are some actual rule differences in terms of spacing between obstacles that then, of course, feeds directly into the course design. So some organizations are going to have shorter minimum distances between obstacles. I think we kind of already touched on it, but that's going to have a big effect on your larger strided dogs that may have to, not have the ability to take full strides and have to shorten their stride a lot. Jen, what are some of the other?
I think the jump height one was the obvious one that I came to. I have a dog who jumps a different height in UKI versus AKC. Now, a lot of the organizations allow you to adjust, but that would be a factor where sometimes people don't want to go to a certain organization. I know for a long time that was what happened with USDA. People would not do USDAA because the jump height that they had to do there was so much taller. I know there's been a lot of shift in that over the years. And along that same lines, kind of looking at like regulations, I think that's one of the big things is the tire. So in AKC, the tire is always one height lower. But in the other organizations, it's the true height. And I know a lot of people worry about the dog not making the judgment. And in that case, we're not just talking a jump, we're actually talking their head, right? So if they over jump or under jump, they're going to hit versus a jump. Contact zones. I have a student who trained a running dog walk with 100% assumption that he was going to only do AKC and was okay with the dog being high in an AKC contact. And then all of a sudden decided, I think I want to give UKI a try. And all of a sudden the dog is struggling now with the shorter contact. So maybe your dog can hit an AKC contact, but isn't good at UKI. And I think the contact zone would be something to take into account. I think, contact zones are different, but I think dog walk height, teeter height, A-frame height are pretty much the same across organizations. I think what accessibility you have, it's going to be difficult if you want to do NADAC, but your instructor only sets up for USDA. Just because NADAC has some different equipment and different rules and different flows. So I think that comment came up earlier that a lot of times what you shift yourself or find yourself doing is based on a recommendation from your instructor or what your classmates are doing. So I think kind of keeping in mind that if you say, hey, I do want to go do ISC, I want to give it a try, you probably need to make sure that you're finding some access, whether it be through privates, rentals, training classes, that you get to train on that. So I think kind of your accessibility to training is going to be somewhat of a factor as well.
I think sometimes people also have a bucket list item of being on TV. And AKC pretty much has like the monopoly on being on TV with Westminster and some other events in this country. So
I think Westminster is keeping a lot of people in the running for the mock. I could tell you easily at least 10 dogs I know that the only reason that people are putting mocks on them is to go to Westminster. So should Westminster, if they're listening, should they ever drop that rule, it might negatively affect AKC titling classes because people aren't going to push for that as much.
Right.
I know that was the case with Surprise. I pushed hard to get the mock simply so she becomes eligible for Westminster. So I put myself in that category. And again, I know several other people as well. So yeah, kind of getting a chance to do some of the bigger events. You have to do AKC titling to go to Westminster, or you have to, do this to do that. So for sure, that's going to play a role in things as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I think we can close with, if you're a person who's looking to learn more about the different organizations and making the call between ISC work and quote unquote regular classes, talk to people who do both. And the other thing that you can do besides reviewing the rules, so that can be super interesting for people like Sarah, very dry for people like me, is take a look at course maps, right? And that'll tell you. So you don't know what jumping looks like in ISC. After you review 5 or 6 course maps, you'll get a very good feel for that, right? And same thing with, Snooker's games in USDA or something like that. And you'll start to kind of see the pattern shake out there. And then the last thing is to work backwards. So if you're thinking about doing ISC work, I think the beautiful thing to do there is say, I like these kind of courses, I like this kind of handling, or I like these kind of challenges, or this is what's available to me. And you're going to do it no matter what, whether you're good, bad, your Q rate is 100% or 0%, right? But the other thing that you can do is work backwards. So say you live up in the Northeast and you hear about Westminster, which you probably will, then you're like, oh, hey, this is something that I would like to do. You can kind of work backwards and say, I'm going to gear up for that, and maybe focus less on, say, international stuff, and so on and so forth. If you have maybe an 8-inch Papillon, then maybe FCI Agility World Championship is like not going to be at the very top of your priority list. Right?
I also want to say that, yes, there are differences in organizations, but honestly, 90% of agility is the same, no matter what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And so, I do think that it is that you can, a lot of your training is not going to change, especially in the beginning. And I do think that as you kind of discover what you enjoy the most, if you kind of drop off the other types of agility and point forward, kind of optimize, like if Jen with B, just started tomorrow and never ran another regular course again and only ran FCI style courses, I've got to think that in 6 months or a year, it would be as if she had only ever done those styles of courses. So I think that you can pivot mid-career of the dog.
Yeah, don't get paralyzed.
Yes.
Don't get paralyzed by the choice. Just choose one or the other and go for it. You can always change later. Remember, there was an entire generation of dogs when international stuff came along where essentially mid-careers, they had to learn backsides, and they did it.
Yep. Absolutely. So before we wrap up, I meant to actually start this podcast with this absolutely, completely unrelated, quick little topic, but I wanted to congratulate Jennifer because I saw on Facebook that she has been being inducted into the Hall of Fame for your high school, right?
Yeah. Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about that because that is That's cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny. I can be a little more candid because I don't think any of my high school non-agility people are ever going to listen to this. I think it's kind of humorous and funny, not to diminish the accomplishment, but last fall, I was reached out to by an old professor. I have to say professor, I guess in high school, they're just called teachers.
Right.
A teacher at my high school. Hey, I'm reaching out, can you give me a call or whatever? And I called and they basically said, I've been nominated and they would like to induct me into the Hall of Fame. And I was a little bit confused about it first. To be honest, I'm still confused because they're calling it distinguished alumni. And I'm not sure what that exactly means. It's obviously not for sport in the sense that there's also somebody coming in for holding some swimming record and somebody that has football under their name. So distinguished alumni, I'm not sure, but they had put together a list of like accomplishments that they thought viewed acknowledgement into my Hall of Fame. So I actually get to spend Valentine's Day going to a ceremony, getting a plaque, and kind of getting it hung up and done at my high school. So it's kind of cool. I'm pretty excited about it, but it's just kind of fun or funny that agility has taken me here. And I think it also, it's kind of cool for me because I opened my business, which is Incredipause, in the same town that I graduated high school, was born and raised. So I think that's kind of part of it too. I built this business, I built this brand, I built this name right here in my hometown. So yeah, I'll have to touch base. We'll talk about it again after the ceremony and see how it goes.
I love it. I'm going to say that I'm going to declare that you won high school. Like, that's awesome.
You're like the LeBron James. You're like the LeBron James, right? Of your high school, right?
Yeah,
he brought the championship back home to Cleveland.
I guess. I don't know.
So that's what you've done. Okay, so let's be honest. Distinguished means famous. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a restaurant and they're like, "Oh no, I'm sorry, sir, you don't have a reservation." I say, "I am Jennifer Crank," and I get seated right away. I get lots of free stuff. I get free movie tickets. I ride the Jennifer Crank name. So I think
on the list of accomplishments, very few were actually like agility title related. They had like been on HBO and has a trading card.
Oh, that's awesome.
Worked with ESPN and NFL. So like where we as agility people would think, won nationals 3 times or this, that, the other, they were thinking more about the like general public, what the general public would acknowledge. And I mean, in that regard, right? Like if you look at it as a non-agility person from an outsider, all of that is incredibly cool. Like I have not one, but 2 top trading cards. I've been interviewed and had Mary Carrillo at my house for 2 days with HBO, and I've worked with ESPN and NFL players and kind of made myself a name in that sense. But when they mentioned it, I'm like, it's a sport that nobody is going to really know anything about, where I'm jumping dogs over colored PVC. But hey, if they want to give me the credit, I'll go back and take it, and hopefully maybe introduce a little bit more people into the community that I'm here.
I love it. And one last thing to note is that we are, if you're listening to this right away, we are currently just launched our National Agility Championship prep course. So this is a online course to prepare for the AKC National Agility Championship. It has small space exercises that you can set up and do. It has analysis of all of last year's maps, and it has scouting reports for all of the judges. So if you're going to this event, you definitely want to check it out. If you compete in AKC Agility, the trends that we look at are, basically going to be the trends you're going to see throughout all AKC Agility courses. And if you've been wanting to see how you can work with us and get feedback from the 3 of us, this is a great kind of intro course to see how that works with Bad Dog Agility. So you can look at that at baddogagility.com/NAC. And every year we have people who take our prep course and then end up in the finals or winning the event or things like that. So we've had a lot of success preparing people for the event. In fact, we've been doing it for 12 years. I think this is our 12th National Agility Championship prep course. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsor, hititboard.com. Happy training.
Thank you for listening to Bad Dog Agility. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, updates, and links to all our socials, just check out our website, www.baddogagility.com. If you haven't already signed up for our email subscription, we would love to have you join the BDA community. Until next time, take care.